treating me as if nothing I own is mine, makes me sick. Mark, my dad, used to believe he could take anything he wanted, but not anymore. Living under his house was a continual power struggle, as much as difficult. He was naturally good at making everything about him. If I saved money to buy something, it wouldn't be long before he either claimed it for himself or behaved as though I owed him. Not much aid either came from my mother, Sarah. She backed him always but lacked control. She would reply, like that explained everything. It's just the way he is. I mostly managed to put up with it. Working part-time, I attempted to keep out of his path and save what I could. Getting through it and then moving out was my straightforward aim. Mark, he couldn't leave things alone though. He removed one item I worked most on, my car, and that marked the breaking point. My passport to escape was that beat-up old Ford Taurus I had bought for less than nothing. I fixed it for months, using every free dime to ensure it ran properly. It was independence, not simply an automobile, to me. Mark, on the other hand, thought differently. He saw something he could use anytime he felt like it, not as mine. He hardly bothered asking when he first took it. I arrived home from work, and it vanished. A few hours later, he rolled up, behaving as though it were no great deal. Borrowed it for a bit, he replied nonchalantly, as I ought to have been appreciative. After that, I advised him he couldn't take it without asking, and tried to impose limits. He dismissed me as not very important. After another one of his joyrides, I discovered the car damaged a week later. He discounted it when I approached him. "It is an old car," he remarked. "Stop behaving as though it is worth something." I started hiding the keys at that point. Up until one morning I woke up, I felt protected. Then the car vanished once more. I'd had enough. I reported it lost and phoned the cops. Mark turned explosive as they arrived. There he stood, screaming at me in front of the police. "You phoned the police on me. I am your father." I was not offended. "You took my car without permission. That's called stealing, Dad." His voice breaking, he yelled out, "It's not stealing if it's family." Though they forced him to return the automobile, the cops did not arrest him. To him, though, it was more about my standing up to him than about the car. He mumbled under his breath about how unappreciative I was for days following. He pined around the house. He called me into the living room one evening then. "You're done here," he stated frigidly. "You call the cops on me after everything I have done for you. You have 2 weeks to pack your stuff and leave." I watched him, trying to understand what he was saying. "You stole my car and are kicking me out?" He failed to blink at all. "My house, my rules. There's the door should you object." My mother was simply seated there, silent. She hardly would glance at me. I had been working full-time for a few months at the time Mark expelled me. Though I wasn't rich, I had enough saved to begin considering my alternatives. I was not about to sofa surf indefinitely. An apartment was out of reach. It then occurred to me to buy a camper. Though it wasn't luxurious, it could be my personal area. Nor landlords, nor neighbors, most particularly not parents. Following some late-night browsing through classified advertisements, I came upon one that appeared interesting. A decent-sized travel trailer with a touch of rough edges but strong bones. That was my best try at some steadiness. I visited Frank, a tough elderly man selling, haggled a little, and turned over most of my savings. Frank helped me to hook the trailer to my Taurus and pull it away. The difficulty now concerned where to park it. I couldn't just set up somewhere for camp. At that point, I considered David, my uncle. He has always been the strange one out of the family, the one who refused to tolerate Mark's garbage. He hardly hesitated when I told him what happened. "You could store that camper of yours in my yard," he remarked. "Stay as long as you need to. Just keep the lawn mowed and avoid burning the place down." David resided in the county on a few acres of woodland. Though not perfect, it was a hell of a lot better than dealing with my dad. Though little, the camper was plenty. It featured a bathroom, a little kitchenette, and a bedroom. That was my own area. All that counted. Over the following few weeks, I settled down, cleaned the camper, and created a home-like impression. I even laid some lights on a little deck outside. Away from the continual drama of my parents, it was beginning to feel like I could really establish a life for myself. Naturally, though, Mark couldn't leave it alone. I was living in a camper at the time he found out, and it was like a switch turned off. He wanted the one item I had left, not satisfied with kicking me out. Mark naturally couldn't let me have even that. He began behaving as though it was illegal for me to own a camper the minute he learned about my arrangement at David's. With his regular sneer, he continued, You're living like some kind of drifter. Actually, why do you have one and I don't? He said was what he meant. Then one day he appeared out of nowhere at David's house carrying my mother. This was already unusual, as David and he get along hardly at all. David has always been the family's black sheep, and to be honest, he's really forthcoming about how much he finds Mark objectionable. Mark, in any case, comes up in his pickup, gets out, and heads right to my camper without even waving. I go outside, and he is just staring at my trailer, as though he were examining it, though it's not a praise. "Nice setup you got here," he says. When he's about to start anything, he always employs a passive-aggressive attitude, trying to keep it laid back. "Yeah, it's working for me," I say. Circling it gently, he says, "I've always wanted a camper like this. Would be excellent for some camping excursions, you know. I and your mom have been talking about getting into that." Then, he says nonchalantly, "So, I'm planning to take it camping this summer." And that signaled the start of the entire catastrophe. Thinking they couldn't possibly be serious, I laughed. No, this is my home. I'm not letting you borrow." Mark's countenance changed right away. "What do you mean, no? I am your father. I shouldn't have to ask you to borrow something like this." Trying to keep my tone light. "Well, you don't have to ask," I said, "because the answer's no." My mother then entered with the guilt trip. "We raised you, are your parents, and all we are asking for is a small favor." Right now I was getting enraged. "You didn't raise me so you could take my stuff anytime you feel like it. This is my home. I'm not just going to let you tow it off and use it like it's yours." Of course, Mark wasn't going to let it go. Beginning to pace, he murmured about how unappreciative I was, and how he couldn't believe his own kid would treat him like that, like I had betrayed them or something. My mother stood there shaking her head, trying to cut off the talk. "Look," I said, "this isn't up for debate. You're not taking the trailer. End of story." They left finally, but not before Mark conducted one last excavation. "You've changed," he replied, shaking his head. "I'm not sure what happened to you." Yes, I have changed, but was it not because of them? Years of being controlled, discounted, and treated like nothing I owned were never really mine. It all accumulated. Naturally, he was blind to it. I was the person they had produced, with all their entitlement and self-interest. So be it if that made me the villain in his view. Following that first clash, I assumed things would cool out, but I had it exactly backwards. Mark began phoning me practically daily, bringing up the trailer like we hadn't already discussed. "You're being selfish," he would counsel. "You don't need all that much space. Hence, what are you even using it for?" After a time, I stopped responding to his calls, but then my mother began messaging me. "Your father is really upset. Why can't you just let him use it? It's not like you're doing anything important with it." Still, it wasn't about the trailer. It was about control. The thought of me having something he wanted but could not have made Mark sick, and he became more determined to wear me down the more I said no. David, bless your heart, was on my side all along. One night as we were cooking burgers in the backyard, he advised not giving in. "He will never give it back if you let him take it once." I knew, turning over a burger. "That's why I'm staying my ground." David nodded. "Good. This is my property, and he doesn't get to call the shots here. I will handle it should he show up here once more." Knowing David had my back helped me feel a little better, but I also knew Mark well enough to know he wasn't going to quit. He would discover alternate means of acquiring his desired outcome. He did always. Sure enough, some weeks later, I woke up to the sound of someone fiddling outside the trailer. Late, most likely about midnight, I could see the dim glow of a flashlight drifting around. As I got out of bed and peeped out the window, my heart began to hammer. My dad was there, hunched down by the hitch, trying to tie the trailer to his truck. I found it hard to believe. Actually, he was trying to pilfer the damn thing. I yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" and hurled some clothes outside. He paused momentarily, then got back up, trying to play it off, like I was dumb enough to believe him. "Oh, I was just checking something." "Checking what?" I said in a snap. How would one steal my trailer? His usual borrowing of garbage made him defensive. I was not feeling any of it. "You're not borrowing anything," I said. "Get out of here before I call the cops." I wasn't moving when he tried to argue. He finally bolted, murmuring about how unappreciative I was and how I would regret handling him this way. I turned on full lockdown early the next morning. I ordered motion sensor lights, heavy-duty locks, and even a reasonably priced security camera from Amazon. My dad was going to need a crowbar and a lot of bravery to grab the trailer if he wanted it, though it certainly wasn't the last That was the first actual conflict over the trailer. Mark was someone I knew sufficiently to know he wouldn't let this go. He was tenacious and would not stop until he either obtained it or destroyed every bridge in the process when he wanted anything. And me also? I had not thought about turning back. I was not allowing anyone to take away from me my house, my safe haven, notably, not him. I thought I had seen the worst of Mark's fixation on the trailer after the whole midnight sabotage event. But nope, he was not finished. He resolved to bring in reinforcements, the rest of the family, and let me say, my extended family is akin to a gang of gossip-loving, drama-fueled mayhem robots. Should there be a point of contention, they will find means to exacerbate it. My mum began it. She got immediately into her guilt trip pattern and phoned me the following day, her voice pleasant and false. You know your father was just trying to do something nice for us. He has been under so much stress lately. A camping trip would really help him relax. Why do you have to be so difficult? I just giggled. Mom, he tried to steal my trailer in the middle of the night. That's not doing something nice. That's being a psycho. Oh, stop being so dramatic, she remarked. You're exaggerating, right? Since clearly defending myself is overdone. I hung up telling her I didn't want to hear it. Still, that was only one end of it. A few days later, out of the blue, one of my cousins contacted me. Trying to seem laid back, they said, Hey, so, I overheard about the whole trailer thing. What's going on? Already irritated. What's going on? I said. Is that my dad thinks he can take my stuff whenever he wants, and I'm not letting him. Making a tiny hum noise, my cousin seemed to be weighing both sides of the dispute. Well, he is your dad. Do you not think you ought to let him borrow it? I got a surge in blood pressure. First of all, it's my home. Second, even if I wasn't living in it, that doesn't mean he can just take it. Why is everyone acting like I'm the bad guy here, laughing as though it were no great matter? Relax, man, they said. After all, maybe you should consider it. He is your dad. It dawned on me then that Mark had most likely been phoning every member of the family, spinning some sob tale about how I was a greedy jerk who neglected to assist his impoverished, industrious parents. He was classic, victimizing me personally and pushing everyone else against me. I was not about to participate, though. A few weeks later, a family gathering presented the true clash. By then, things were beginning to feel normal once I was completely ensconced in David's backyard with the camper. David, who actually liked having me around, chose to have the reunion on his land that year. I thought it was a great idea when he advised I park the trailer close to the edge of the property for the reunion. It prevented me from sharing a room with anybody, especially my parents, and offered me my own privacy. It also presented an opportunity to highlight all the work I had done on the camper. Things seemed good as I pulled the trailer to its designated location and set everything up, along with building a fire pit and turning up the grill. I even laughed a little with cousins I hadn't seen in a while. It seemed as though perhaps this family get-together would go without a hitch for a moment. Then Mark arrived, and things went south. He hardly said hi at all. He just marched up to where I was seated and began in on me. You really brought the trailer here? He said loud enough for everyone to hear. You couldn't let your old man borrow it, but you'll drag it out here to show it off? I inhaled deeply, attempting to cool off. It's my trailer, Dad. I can do what I want with it. Throwing his palms up, he shouted, Unbelievable. You don't care about family at all. All we wanted was one little favor, and you couldn't even do that. At this point, a few more family members had begun to assemble around, ostensibly showing an interest in the meal, but obviously listening in secret. Naturally, my mother interrupted since she finds it impossible to stop things from getting worse. Shaking her head, Do you see what we're dealing with? She asked. We have done everything for him. This is the thankfulness we get. I lost it. Everything for me? You stole my car, tried to steal my trailer, and now you're turning the entire family against me because I won't let you walk all over me? Yeah, great parenting, guys. The audience stopped momentarily, then one of my cousins came up. Bless her. Crossing her arms, she remarked, Honestly, he's right. Maybe it's time you two quit treating him like garbage for years. Mark's face went brilliant crimson, and my mother looked as though she had recently been slapped. Hurrying off, they mumbled about how no one in the family now respected them. A few days following the reunion, I returned home to discover my trailer coated in muck, as if someone had run a truck across the yard and sprayed mud all around the sides. I saw a stop right in front of the trailer and tire tracks straight leading to it. When I phoned David to find out whether he had seen anything, he merely laughed. Yeah, your dad came by earlier. I figured he would try something foolish since he was ranting about how you embarrassed him at the reunion. Why didn't you stop him? I asked. I was occupied viewing from the window, he added. Don't panic, though. I have it on camera. David had set up a security camera a while back, and he discovered that my dad was dragging into the yard, revving his motor, and spinning his tires in the mud like some sort of middle-aged kid. Though I was annoyed, really I couldn't help giggling at how pitiful it was. David thought it funny, but also acknowledged it was probably necessary after I put up a fake security sign declaring, "Surveillance in progress." I was not taking any chances. Just in case Mark tried something again, I decided to relocate the trailer nearer David's house. Always looking out for me, David reasoned we could go one step further. Though it sounded a little extreme, he volunteered to assist me in installing a GPS tracker on it. I was tempted, really. "This thing's waterproof," he said, "and if the trailer moves more than a few feet, it will alert your phone." We tested the tracker under the trailer the next afternoon. It went rather nicely. My camper resembled a fortification somewhat extensively. Strangely enough, Mark never really apologized for any of it. He felt himself to be entirely justified, though obviously he still had some tricks up his sleeve. I assumed the mud stunt was as low as Mark could go. Things were calm for a while once I secured the trailer with motion sensor lights and heavy-duty locks. Very quiet. It seemed like the quiet before the tempest. And, well, I was right. When I returned home from running errands 2 weeks later, David was pacing the yard with his phone in hand and seemed more agitated than I had ever seen him. "You will never know who showed up here while you were away," he continued. The response I knew beforehand was correct. "Let me conjecture, Dad." Shaking his head, David responded, "Yep, and he brought a tow truck this time." I froze for a moment. "Are you serious? A freaking tow truck?" David answered, "Oh, I'm serious." His voice tinged with rage. He told the driver some BS about it being his, and that you'd given him permission to take it. Tried to tow the trailer straight off the property. I was seeing red right then. "What were you doing?" David responded matter-of-factly. "I went outside with my shotgun. Didn't have to use it, of course." The tow truck guy wanted no part of it and left as soon as I told him what was really going on. Your dad started yelling about how I was a traitor and how this whole family's against him. Great dad. Every time he doesn't have his way, someone else always bears responsibility. I was still boiling by the time I came home and unloaded my purchases. I understood I had to face this squarely, else it would never stop. I gave him a call then, I exclaimed, almost controlling my rage. "Hey, Dad, care to explain why you showed up today with a tow truck at David's house?" "Oh, don't start with me," he shot. "You should have let me have the trailer. I wouldn't have to go through all this if you weren't so damn selfish." "Selfish?" I chuckled, not a joyful laugh. "You tried to steal my home, and I am the selfish one? Are you even hearing yourself?" "It's not stealing anything," he continued, like that made it acceptable. "Besides, you could live somewhere else if you really wanted to. You're not even using it for anything vital." Though it still bothered me, this wasn't the first time he tried to act as though my trailer didn't count. "You have no say on what's important to me," I said, "and for the last time, you're not taking the trailer. If you show up here again, I'm calling the cops. I don't care if you're dead." After that, he had not much to say, and finally, he hung up on me. I sat there for a little trying to cool off after the call, but it wasn't working. He simply didn't understand whatever number of times I urged him to quit. Worse still, didn't care. David even advised phoning him and outright banishing him from the premises, though it would at least convey a message. We both knew Mark wouldn't pay attention. I believed things could at last quiet down when David forbade my dad from his land. Mark was not welcome anywhere close to the trailer, he made plain. It appeared for a time that Mark had understood. No calls, no surprise visits, no fresh turmoil. It nearly seemed too perfect to be real. Of course it was. He seemed to outdo himself somehow. He walked all the way this time. He pilfers the campers. Indeed, he picked it when I was out of town. For work, I had to leave town. Nothing significant. Just a few days. Before I departed, I checked that everything was tightly closed. I even asked David to monitor the camper in my absence. Let's be honest. I felt my dad wouldn't have the courage to try anything after being banned, so I wasn't too bothered. Boy, I was mistaken. The first night I'm away, I get an alert on my phone from the GPS tracker app. Movement detected. The trailer is on the move. At first, I thought maybe it was a glitch or something, but when I opened the app and saw that my trailer was headed down the highway, I realized it had to be him. I contacted David right away. Hey, did you move the camper or something? No, he answered with a perplexed tone. Why? I said. Because it's gone. The GPS reports that it's halfway to town. I swear I heard him bang his coffee mug down. That son of a... He must have stolen it. As it happens, Mark had grabbed a spare set of keys weeks before without me knowing it. Playing the long game, he had been waiting for me to be gone so he could swoop in and grab what he felt was rightly his. David lacked even a moment of hesitation. Call the cops. I will meet you there. Trying to explain that your dad stole your camper isn't as simple as you would expect, I told 911. Still, the dispatcher was really laid back. She requested evidence of ownership, and I informed her I had GPS logs and a title to show it. She said, "Do you know the suspect?" "Yeah," I responded, my blood heating. "It's my dad." She paused, as if she needed a second to absorb that. "Okay, we'll send cops to intercept the trailer. Please don't confront him personally." Like I was intending to let that slide pass. When David answered my call back, I informed him where the GPS said the camper was headed. He grabbed me, and we began monitoring it personally. We pursued the GPS signal for what seemed to be eternity. David started murmuring things like, "I can't believe the nerve of that man," and my heart was racing. And at last, we caught up. My dad's truck was there, dragging my camper down a back road, as if he had recently acquired the damned object. I advised David to wait even though he wanted to pull up and block him in. The cops were not far behind, hence I was not about to risk aggravating matters personally. Indeed, a few minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights passed quickly by us. They stopped Mark exactly as he was approaching his driveway. He seemed so arrogant, as if he had just carried off the century's heist. We hauled up behind the police, and I stepped out of the truck. Mark was already debating with the police. "It's my son's trailer," he said, frantically flailing his hands. The officer answered coolly, "You took it without asking from a property you were banned from, and you think that's borrowing? Sir, do you have proof of ownership for this trailer?" I turned over the title and showed them the GPS data. "It is mine. He stole it." The policeman turned to face Mark. "Do you have any evidence of permission to use this trailer or ownership?" Dad stammered. The second made his face redder. "That gives me the right to use it. It's a family trailer. I am his father." The cop looked not really impressed. "Sir, this is considered theft without explicit permission or proof of ownership. Kindly get away from the vehicle." Mark went crazy when they removed the restraints. "You're really arresting me for borrowing a trailer from my own son," he yelled. "Indeed, sir," the officer answered coolly. He yelled at me, "You're ruining the family," as they arrested him. "I raised you. I gave you everything, and this is how you treat me?" Just as they were getting him into the patrol car, my mother arrived sprinting from the home, screaming, "What's going on? Why are you arresting him?" She turned on me right away, as the officer clarified the circumstances. "How could you do this to your father? He didn't mean any harm." "No, Mom," I answered, speaking deliberately. "He intended to take something not his, and I'm done letting him do that." Calls began arriving shortly after the arrest. Everybody begged me to withdraw the charges, including my mother, aunts, and relatives. My mother moaned over the phone, "He didn't mean to hurt you. You fail to see what this is doing to him," with a firm voice. "No, Mom," I answered. "I understand precisely what this is doing to him. For once in his life, he's facing the consequences of his actions." "But he's your father," she sobbed. "And I'm his son," I said, "not his property. I'm not lowering the charges." She hung on me. I haven't heard from her since. Mark finally entered a guilty plea to spare himself from jail. He owed a big fine and compensation. He begged. The family begged. But you know what? I finished with them. I formally have cut off my dad. No more interaction. Having saved enough, I'm now driving my camper, heading out from this town permanently. I'll at last have the calm and independence I've been battling for, whether I settle somewhere fresh or just keep moving. So be it if my family finds me selfish for safeguarding myself. I am not turning around.